Thank you. Our next guest, who I'll have the pleasure to interview, is Anthony Levandowski. He is a well-known, somewhat controversial entrepreneur in the autonomous vehicle space. He was one of the first people running Google's efforts to develop autonomous vehicles. Then he founded a company called Otto, which was sold to Uber. So we're talking about two serious names in the technology department. And his latest venture is called Pronto. And we're going to talk about that today. Anthony? So Pronto is very new. When was the start date?
I was starting early last year.
Okay, so you wrote a blog in Medium, on Medium, that's also available through the Pronto site, in which you acknowledged a couple of things. One is that, given the fact that you, as I mentioned, is a little controversial, your return to the industry was probably being noted by some with degrees of enthusiasm or degrees of maybe disappointment. But that also, you kind of indicated you had sort of learned a lot about autonomous vehicles, and in some ways you were pessimistic, in some ways you were optimistic about their futures. So why don't you talk first, we'll be positive here, talk about what you're optimistic about and talk about what you're pessimistic about.
Sure, thank you. I'm always optimistic on technology. I think technology is the way that we're going to change everything in the future and reorganize our entire transportation system. I'm also super positive on trucking, because I think trucking is a great way to bring some of the new technologies they're working on for self-driving because of the simplicity of the routes that are being driven over the road and the driver shortage.
Okay, so your product, your company is called Pronto. Your product is called
CoPilot.
CoPilot, I'm sorry, I keep drawing a blank there. It's called CoPilot. It seems to be fairly simple. Obviously, nothing like this is fairly simple. But when you compare it against the dream of a fully level, like level 4, level 5 autonomous vehicle, it's just a fraction of that. But your view is that it's very practical. So can you talk about what CoPilot does?
Absolutely. So CoPilot effectively makes your job while driving a truck easier and safer. We do that by having a set of cameras and one forward-looking radar. And it's a very easy kit to retrofit your truck for it. It's different in a sense from all these cumbersome self-driving level 4 systems that you've seen, where the goal there is to completely remove the driver out of the equation from the start. And I think from what I've learned in the last 15 years, some hard-learned lessons there, creating an evolutionary step where you're building a business that makes sense along the way is a lot better than trying to go for this mythical idea of having a truck with nobody in it.
Right, now we'll come back to the CoPilot and its various capabilities, but is that still kind of I'll call it a schism, but two different camps in the autonomous vehicle field where there are people who are maybe a little more humble and or humbled by what's happened over the last 10 years versus those who still are looking at that level 4, level 5 autonomy in which there's no driver or there's just a passenger, let's say in a private vehicle, a personal vehicle, riding along to the store while the car drives itself. Does that dichotomy still exist?
I think it still exists. I think that everybody still shares a dream of, in the future, being able to push a button, not just get a car, but push a button and have everything that you can imagine that you would want to buy be delivered to you within 2 hours. To get there, we can't get there with the drivers that we have today. Even if everybody in America became a truck driver, you didn't have enough vehicles to do that. But if you think about it, that's not the next thing. That's not what's going to happen next month. That's not what's going to happen a year from now, not even a couple of years from now, just because the technical complexity is too high and we just don't know when it's safer than a person. So what we focused on is commercializing the technology that we've built that provides a lot of safety benefits and comfort benefits. So let's take the existing trucks that are on the road today, add cameras and computers to them, and now make them a lot safer and easier to drive. There's still a person responsible, so you're not removing the driver there, but you're bridging the gap by making that truck safer. And I imagine a world in the near future where this kind of feature would be standard on every truck, because you wouldn't want to have just one driver. You'd want to have the human driver, but have a computer that can oversee and maybe correct if a mistake was made.
Okay, so if I'm a fleet and you came to me and you were trying to sell this to me, what gets installed in my vehicle? How much of it is hardware? And obviously, the most of it's going to be software. But what kind of hardware needs to be installed?
Yeah, so our kit has 3 components to it. It has the drive-by-wire, which is basically a braking, a steering, and a throttle via computer actuators that go onto your vehicle. And then we have the sensor suites, so we can either reuse the radar that you have if this is a forward collision mitigation system is on your truck, and we add 6 cameras on top of that. With that, we have the computer that runs our software on it, and that gets updated once a month as we keep making improvements to it. So with those 3 components, you then have a truck that is now able to drive on the highway on its own.
So if I'm, again, a fleet owner, what's this going to cost me per truck, and why do I even bother? I mean, I still got to pay the driver. That's not going to help. This is not like platooning where there's an implicit promise of fuel savings because you're knocking down the headwinds, that kind of aerodynamic benefit. So why bother?
Well, why bother is you're taking a job that's very difficult, that has high turnover, and you're making it easier for the driver by bringing this, effectively comfort technology that's available in a lot of the high-end cars today. You're also improving your safety returns because you now have a second set of eyes that is, watching out for a dangerous situation. Right now, we're offering it for $5,000, and that's an introductory pricing. We might charge it per monthly after that. But the goal is that this is really helping you keep your drivers because it's so much easier of a job. I don't know if you have one of these, nice cars that has these features on it, but
no, I have very old cars.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, and so the people that we've talked to it's a game changer for how they conduct their job. It's almost the difference between, elevator operators that have to operate the crank and just stop the elevator at the right height so that you can get out without having to jump up or jump down, to pushing a button and then going to the right spot for you. We're not removing the driver anyway, so we still require that, and that's, I think, the right move for the short time being because the technology really hasn't been proven to be safer than a person yet.
You mentioned a second set of eyes, the idea here being that the driver, there's still a lot of responsibility on that driver. This is not something where he or she can just take a nap or put a screen in front of them while the truck goes down the road. There's still work to be done, correct?
Correct. Today, we're not shipping a system that allows you to drive from point A to point B without a person involved. There's still your regular driver that has a CDL and they're on duty, and they're paying attention. But the advantage is it's much easier workload. They're able to lean back without having to have their back hunched forward. It's less tiring of a job, and so it's a lot easier for them to, be more rested at the end of the day and avoid accidents that way.
Okay, let's talk. We'll come back to CoPilot, but let's talk about your own change. I won't say change of heart, but your own kind of the way you viewed autonomous vehicle. You joined Google. You were one of the first people there on their effort, which is still ongoing, to develop autonomous vehicles. You developed Otto, which was sold to Uber, and now you're Pronto. You were probably all gung-ho when you joined Google that autonomous cars or autonomous trucks, or really a high degree of autonomy, was within sight. Where along these, 15 years or so, did your views start to change? If somebody would have told you back then, well, you're going to develop a company in 15 years and all it's going to do is what Pronto's doing, you would have said, I'm just a failure then. But you've had kind of an eye-opening about how far this technology can go. You're still excited, you're still enthused, but there's some limitations. There's a humbling somewhere along the line.
Definitely eating my slice of humble pie. And so, that comes from, I think, matching up the enthusiasm for what the technology can and will be able to do in the future with the realities of where it is now and the velocity at which it's improving. So we've made some great improvements in the last 10 years, but we've kind of hit the ceiling where it's difficult to generalize certain circumstances that exist on the road and have computers be able to handle all of the permutations that happen. And so what Pronto is about is really positioning us to build the technology that goes into every single truck and makes every single truck safer, and over time gets upgraded to that path of where we go unmanned. But you can't just go to unmanned because we don't know what that means from a safety perspective, right? So for me, safety is the only metric that determines when we can launch unmanned trucks, and we just aren't there today. Not just us, but the industry as a whole. So, it's taken many years to realize that, but where we are now is that we have all this great technology, and it's not being deployed because everybody's chasing, in my mind, the wrong dream of having the trucks replace people. Humans are underrated. They can do a lot of work for us. So the goal is to really build the evolution standpoint where over time we'll be in every single truck, and from there we'll be able to upgrade it to provide even more safety benefits.
Do you think, though, there are still people they're focused on the Holy Grail? Are there players in this industry that's their goal, and their goal in a foreseeable future, an achievable future?
Well, there's a bunch of companies that have their first product is going to be a driverless vehicle of some sort, whether it's passenger car or commercial vehicle. That's not what we're doing. I think that it's much more interesting to engage with carriers and OEMs and build something that can ship now and evolve to that point in the future, as opposed to being the starting point by which we launch the company. Otherwise, we'll launch 10 years from now or something.
Okay, now you've talked about a test that you ran, not in a truck, in a Prius, but I would imagine if you've got any carriers out there, any fleets who are maybe about to plunk their money down for this, they must have done some testing too. So why don't you first talk about your own personal test of this technology, as well as what kind of testing or early adaptation, not commercial adaptation, but maybe on some kind of laboratory experiment is being done now.
Sure. So we took a very different approach when we started Pronto compared to all the approaches that we've done before. The industry had been built on LiDAR and mapping and these expensive sensors.
Right. I'm not sure this audience knows what LiDAR is. I know that when I was researching this, I read LiDAR and I had to go back and look. So maybe you can describe it.
Yeah, so LiDAR is the easiest way to think about it is a laser radar. It creates a 3D view of the world. It's very helpful for computers to see in 3D because you can measure things a certain distance and then be like, oh, this truck is too close to me, I need to slow down. And that's how the bulk of the technology stacks are built on. After some soul searching and many long walks, trying to figure out why nothing has shipped yet, we kind of realized that the problem isn't so much seeing better, but it's understanding what's happening and being better at driving based on how the other vehicles are moving. And so we built Pronto about that. And so the goal there that we did is building a system that only relies on cameras and is smart enough to basically drive on the highway better than people can. So the goal that we set to the team was, hey, let's do kind of our moon landing would be drive from one side of the country to the other without any human interventions whatsoever. So
And it was third time?
It was our third attempt that we actually made it. So we left San Francisco and we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge and we took Highway 80 across entire country. It's a beautiful drive. It took 50 hours, and then we got to New York and crossed the George Washington Bridge, and it took another 50 hours to get the last mile there because of traffic. But no kidding aside, I think that was a phenomenal goalpost for the team to achieve and to have, to basically be able to take a vehicle from one side of the country to the other without touching the steering wheel, brake, or gas, not for rest stops, not for fueling stops, to kind of convince ourselves that, yes, the technology will work and we'll be able to do that over time, and then scaling that back and saying, okay, what can we offer commercially that's more reliable so it doesn't work 1 out of 3 times, but it works every time.
How many times did you have to take the wheel?
Well, you mean across country?
I'm assuming you were in the driver's seat.
Yeah, so I was in the driver's seat because I wanted to make sure that we did it correctly, and we have a video of this, and we didn't touch the wheel a single time.
Not even once?
Not a single time, yeah.
Well, what about when you had to get off for refueling or human breaks?
Yep. So we had pre-planned rest stops for the car and the human, and so we had our first stop was just outside of Reno. The next stop was Salt Lake City. So you can imagine these are fairly far out. You got to plan it out, plan your bathroom breaks cleanly, and then overnight we had the vehicle. So the vehicle automatically pulled off the highway, came to a stop. And it would wait for a remote command to say, okay, you're clear to resume now. And that's what we did for kind of a hotel overnight break. The car would basically be stopped we had a little note on the door, explaining something, and then the car would basically be on the side of the road or on the side of the exit, parked, waiting for the command to resume.
All right, now we've spoken and you indicated that you don't think you're too far away from announcing some deals with some fleets. What kind of testing have they done on this?
Yeah, so the fleets have mainly sent their drivers that are interested in checking out the technology to drive in our trucks and get their experience, and it's been phenomenal to see the reactions. We've had people giggle and they've been laughing. We had one guy that almost teared up because it was such a game-changing technology for them. And we've had some people like, oh, I already have this on my trucks. And then when we put them in the truck, they drive behind it and they're like, oh, I see, this is different. So there's a little bit of education that we have to do in terms of what is it that we're offering. We're offering a level 2 system, meaning that the person is still responsible for driving. But there's like a wide variety of quality in that. And so what we strive to do is build Pronto and CoPilot as the best highway driving system out there.
Now, level 4 and 5 are some degrees of full autonomy. Obviously, 4 must be less than 5, otherwise it'll be the same. What's in 3? What happens in 3?
Yeah, so 3 is the idea where you're sharing the control, where the system can drive for some of the time and you can go to sleep, but then I'll wake you up, and then you can kind of re-engage and be responsible at certain times. And so it's where you're transitioning the responsibility to the vehicle for part of the drive. 4 is doing it for all of the drive, but not everywhere. And then 5 is all of the drive everywhere all the time.
If a carrier signs on and buys it for X number of trucks, what's the installation process? Are you going to be putting it in? Do you have a fleet of trained mechanics that you have been trained in how they're going to implement this? That's number 1. And number 2, would your longer range plan be to sell to OEMs rather than carriers? Now, that's not going to happen now, but later on you sell to a Peterbilt or something like that, and then it goes in the truck on day 1?
Yeah, so I'll personally come over to the shop and install it myself. No, we have a set of technicians that have been trained for this, and we have a procedure for doing it. We also send our safety officer or one of his reports to come out and do training for the drivers, so the drivers understand what the system can and can't do, so that they're not surprised by, oh, I thought it let me go to sleep, or or something like that. And then the goal is that we then ship the kits to their maintenance facility, and our technicians arrive there and retrofit the trucks. It takes about a day per technician for one truck. And it's removable in a day as well if for some reason they chose not to keep it. And then at that point, the driver who's been trained ahead of time, we do a check ride with them so they can understand how everything works and ask any questions they have. And then from there, they continue on with their own system.
Now, early on in your career, you indicated that your view of AVs, which as we pointed out has evolved over the years, involved hardware too, not just software. You've moved away from that. Obviously, hardware is needed, but it ain't going to be yours, correct?
Correct, yep. There's, famous companies once said if you're serious about software, you should make your own hardware. So we started off that way, but then we quickly realized now that the ecosystem is much better at making the hardware than we are.
And this is, we spoke, and this is one of the more head-scratching decisions that I've ever encountered in this whole AV and electric vehicle field was Tesla decided it didn't need to be in the battery business. This is not your area of expertise. There's plenty of battery builders out there. Why? Why not just buy?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, what we've done is CoPilot. We've selected existing, proven tier 1 manufacturers, and we gave them our specs, and we worked with their existing product catalog so that they make something that's very similar to what they already make, but it's been modified slightly so they can be controlled by a computer. And by doing that, the entire supply chain has the capability to have our products being installed at the OEM. Ultimately, we want to just provide the software and provide the best highway driving system of anybody in the world. And by doing that, we need to focus on the software piece. And so working with the OEMs sounds like a great idea. We'd love to have them have another option in what they offer their carriers. By selling to the carriers initially, we're setting the bar at all the carriers and educating them on what to expect and what to request, and what's available for them in the marketplace. So just like you might prefer a Cummins engine or Allison transmission or Eaton transmission, we hope that you'll see Pronto CoPilot as your preferred highway level 2 system.
The tech industry can be pretty ruthless in terms of criticisms of people by name. You've been involved in a few controversies, but your sights here are, a little more achievable, and you're not reaching for the moon. What kind of reaction do you find out there to your plans? Are people saying, okay, I think this can get done, I have a lot of confidence, or is it, are we right back to junior high school type of criticism?
Well,
because let's face it, in life, you never really get past junior high, right?
It's a recurring cycle where you keep having the same things over and over again. I think that it's been mixed reactions. I mean, there's clearly some people that are excited to see what we're building and are like, oh, okay, this is totally something that you guys can deliver and ship on the time frame that's realistic. Some are still bitter, and that's life. You got to move on. I'm just really excited about what we're doing, which is actually shipping real products instead of talking about that and setting the vision for the future. It's great, it's important, but I'm more of a shipping person than a visionary person.
We talked about safety, we talked about driver retention as the two major tools. When you've talked to carriers, which part of that have they latched on the most to?
Well, the job for a carrier of recruiting is immense. You would think that carriers are more in the recruiting business than they are in the trucking business, because you almost have to hire your entire driving team every single year. So imagine if you could cut that down by 50%. We don't know what CoPilot retention rates will improve yet, but from the reaction that we're seeing from people just driving it in a day or two, it's a pretty big changer. If you look at specifically how luxury cars, the take rate for these features is such that they're small in the beginning, but then once you have it, everybody's like, I'll never buy a car that doesn't have a backup camera, or they'll say, highway assist pilot system. And so those are two things that are very sticky, and we think they'll be very sticky specifically in the commercial vehicle space, because you're spending so much time behind the wheel.
Right, and if you work for a carrier that has this, going to another one without it, the change in compensation is probably going to have to be pretty high for you to get used to not having it.
That's what we hope, is that like the safety benefits are a whole additional things, but just the comfort and the easier job that becomes with this technology is that you'll want to go with a carrier that has it over or doesn't.
You use the term in some of your other interviews, crutch technologies, and it's not a compliment. What's a crutch technology, and clearly you don't believe this is?
Yeah, so a crutch technology is something that helps you make demos or sell the vision, but in a way that you can't actually deliver real products with, because it doesn't scale. Either the component is too brittle, it's too expensive. Some of the other technologies that go on the vehicles rely on LiDAR, and at the end of the day, the truck itself is the cheaper part, right? The equipment that you stick on to do the self-driving is 1x, 2x more expensive than the actual truck itself. And that's great for a vision, for a demo, and getting people excited. But when you want to ship something and you go to a asset-based carrier and you're like, hey, I'm going to triple the cost of your truck, and you still need a person to be in there, that just doesn't, it's a nice video, it's a nice conversation, thank you very much for coming, but it's not relevant to their business. And so by having CoPilot priced at $5,000, it is relevant, because they spend more on retention every year than that, and it doesn't rely on these technologies like LiDAR that are great for making a demo, but they're not going to scale commercially because of the cost, the complexity, the reliability, and ultimately it's not what's needed to drive, right? So when you drive, you don't know down to the centimeter how far the vehicles in front of you are. You know how they're moving and what your relationship with them is supposed to be. And that's software that we've built on top of camera data instead of on top of LiDAR data. And so, we see LiDAR as a great demonstrator, and we encourage others to be successful with it. And anything that can be done to improve safety, we're all about that, even if others do it. It's just for us, we don't think that's the right move.
I'm going to give you a question that might be considered a softball question, and you'll probably answer it as such. But I think it's relevant. When this is out, and this is commercially adopted, do you think this is the leading product in AV technology on a commercial basis? Is there anything out there that's maybe still ahead of you that you're shooting for, or is this, I guess the question is this legitimately, as far as we can say, we've gone for now?
I think so. I think, I mean, thank you for the easy question.
Yeah, but I do want to try to hear you place it in the sort of spread of what's available.
Yeah, so people are trying to do more than what we're offering now, but nobody is able to do more. And so what we have in my mind is the best highway driving system. We don't claim to drive better on the surface streets. The system can still be activated, so we're preventing accidents there, but we're not controlling the vehicle. On the highway, we think we can drive better than any other system that's out there. So in some ways, that will be state-of-the-art. It won't be state-of-the-art in terms of like a demo. People can do demos of more fancier things, but it's not something that's repeatable that works everywhere. Because we don't use LiDAR, because we don't use maps, the technology works anywhere in the world. So we've done demos in a number of states, and in some states we just showed up and we drove, and we had never driven that before. And the truck worked the same way it does in our neighborhood, because once you learn how to drive, you know how to drive everywhere, as opposed to when you're making a demo with LiDAR and maps, you're just making a demo and then you can just tune your demo to do something else. But making the entire world a demo is too difficult. And so the interesting part about that is how we've built the technology. We've built the technology to simulate and experience all these adverse weather and situations that you encounter on the road synthetically. So the first time we encountered rain was driving in Nebraska, and this thunderstorm happened, and all of a sudden it was like pouring down and traffic was going 40 miles an hour.
From what I understand about Nebraska, it hasn't stopped since.
Well, you would expect that, but that wasn't part of our car schedule, but it's been up and down. And so when we did that, it was really interesting because it was torrential rains, there was like thunders and everything. And that's the first time the system had ever really driven in rain, but we had done all this augmentation to make it think like it had driven in rain, and the system generalized to that. Same thing for when we took it, accidentally in snow. We were driving in New York State, and a snowstorm hit, and it was light snow, and then medium snow, and then heavy snow where you could barely see the road at all, but it was able to adapt for that accordingly. So.
Only have a couple minutes, so I do want to ask this final question. What's the rollout going to look like? I mean, we've talked about this wonderful system. What's the calendar, and how might announcements come out, and what might they say?
Yeah, so we've selected a launch partner, and that will be making an announcement in the next couple months of their installs and kind of their experience with the system early. And then we're still taking orders for the production for the rest of the year and seeing who is going to be able to evaluate and see how technology works with them.
Okay, if you enjoyed this interview, please note that I interviewed Anthony, Chad Prevost and I interviewed Anthony earlier today on many of these subjects for FreightWaves Radio, so that'll be on this Saturday, actually the following Saturday, at 3 o'clock, 5 p.m. Please, everybody, please give a big round of applause for Anthony Levandowski. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.